Welcome to the latest video in my Bootcamp for Saints series. This is the Cancer section for the Gospel of Mark for 2019. Now, as I've pointed out in this series and in several of my other videos, the Gospel of Mark is organized around the signs of the zodiac. Now, this is a pivotal part of the year, and the very image of Cancer, which is the crab, reflects that. The Gospel in the Zodiac by the Reverend Bill Darlison. It's basically the textbook for this series. The entry of the sun into Cancer on or around the 21st of June each year marks the time of summer solstice, the point of the sun's maximum northerly declination, and the longest day of the year in the northern hemisphere. From this point onwards, the days will gradually but inexorably shorten as the sun sinks lower in the sky. This is what Manilius calls the hinge of the year, the blazing turning point, when the sun is recalled, bends back the length of the day. This notion of reversal seems to be common to all the creatures, including the tortoise, the crayfish, and the lobster, in addition to the crab, which have been held to represent this constellation. I had a Cancer moment just this week. Ever since I was a little boy, I had trouble bending over and touching my toes. And lately it's been impossible. I couldn't get within 6 inches of those things, 15 centimeters. Obviously that's a problem. It's a big problem if you're learning how to kickbox because you need to be flexible if you're going to get any kind of speed going. So I went to DuckDuckGo, which I use instead of Google, because DuckDuckGo does not spy on you. And I typed in, why can't I bend over and touch my toes? And I got an answer. I had a tight ass, and not in a good way. My hip flexors. Now I was fine in my back and in my hamstrings, the back of the top of my legs. But the flexors, which grip the hip, were too tightly bound. So I could not bend properly at the hip. So I had problems with one of my hinges. And this hinge is at the midpoint of my body, just like Cancer's at the midpoint of the year. January, February, March, April, May, June, and July. Okay. Now, when I did what I was told and hit those flexors with my hard foam roller, it kind of freaked me out a little bit. I didn't know those things were there. And this is a psychological lesson of Cancer. It's okay to be comfortable with who you are and where you come from, who your folks are. That's not a problem. But you never know what you're missing until you do a little bit of stretching. The spiritual challenge of Cancer, then, lies in coming to terms with our own need for security, which tends to chain us fearfully to the past and renders us incapable of jettisoning all the accumulated detritus that we consider indispensable to our life. It challenges us to open ourselves up, to remove the shell of conditioning and expose our vulnerable underside, to break through the barrier which shuts out the unfamiliar and which serves as a defense against novel and alien experience. We construct our personal carapace out of family, tradition, and fear, and we keep it in place by averting our eyes from the horizon and fixing our gaze downward. We become fierce protectors of our inheritance and eager collectors of anything which might cushion us or our offspring against life's capricious reversals. Now, people can go too far with that. They think they're being clever, or even worse, cool, when they throw off the chains of tradition. But there's a reason why something has become a tradition, why it's become common. Because it works. Now, our mission as human beings, made in the image of God, is to live the life of an artist, a creator, just as God is a creator. And good art is based on a good foundation. And an artist builds on that foundation. He takes what is old and retranslates it, perhaps extends it, maybe even reacts to it, perhaps subverts it. Okay? But it needs to be done consciously and with a purpose. This is what Jesus does. From there he set out and went away to the region of Tyre. He entered a house and did not want anyone to know he was there. Yet he could not escape notice, but a woman, whose little daughter had an unclean spirit, immediately heard about him, and she came and bowed down at his feet. Now the woman was a Gentile, of Syro-Phoenician origin. She begged him to cast the demon out of her daughter. He said to her, "Let the children be fed first, for it is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." So far so Jewish. But then... But she answered him, "Sir, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." Then he said to her, "For saying that, you may go. The demon has left your daughter." So she went home, found the child lying on the bed, and the demon gone. Well done, old girl, you did us proud. Very soon, Jesus would give us dogs a lot more than scraps. In those days, there was again a great crowd without anything to eat. Again, this is the second of two miraculous feedings of multitudes. The first was of Jews. These people are Gentiles. We are now treated no different than they are. He called his disciples and said to them, "I have compassion for the crowd, for they have been with me now for 3 days and have nothing to eat. If I send them away hungry to their homes, they will faint on the way, and some of them have come from a great distance." His disciples replied, How can one feed these people with bread here in the desert? He asked them, How many loaves do you have? They said, 7. Then he ordered the crowd to sit down on the ground. And he took the 7 loaves, and after giving thanks, he broke them and gave them to his disciples to distribute. And they distributed them to the crowd. They also had a few small fish. And after blessing them, he ordered that these too should be distributed. They ate and were filled, and they took up the broken pieces left over, 7 baskets full. Now there were about 4,000 people. And he sent them away. It's okay to have a day when you just want to retreat from the world. Be among your own kind. We all emerge from a cultural and family complex, and we quite naturally, nay, quite morally, prefer to live in it and defend it. But you can get too locked in, become inflexible, miss opportunities, perhaps unfairly lock somebody out. Like with my hip, until I get it to move properly, I'll never be able to fight with my legs, which is crazy because that's your biggest muscle group right there. But there came a time when Jesus quite naturally wanted to retreat and be alone with his friends so they can recharge their batteries. But his time on earth was destined to be short, and he probably wasn't allowed a lot of opportunities for this kind of recharge. This passage comes before Jesus' encounter with the Gentiles. The apostles gathered around Jesus and told him all that they had done and taught. He said to them, Come away to a deserted place all by yourselves and rest a while. For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. And they went away in the boat to a deserted place by themselves. Now many saw them going and recognized them, and they hurried there on foot from all the towns and arrived ahead of them. As he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion for them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd, and he began to teach them many things. So when Jesus wanted to retreat, but the Syrophoenician woman found out where he was, that was actually the second time he tried and failed to do that, and both attempts happened in the cancer section. Now here's an interesting passage from Darlison's book. He shows us how Mark uses the zodiac to describe the relationship between Jesus and John the Baptist. But Darlison also talks about Christmas Day. It's common nowadays to say that we got December 25th from the worshippers of Sol Invictus, the invincible sun. But actually, that's backwards. The pagans picked up that date from us. Although, as you'll see, Darlison doesn't know that for sure. We've been playing around with it from the very beginning of the church, and Darlison does show us why. The pagans didn't start using it until 100 years after we were. This is actually documented. For Christians, this time of year has always been associated with John the Baptist, and his birth is celebrated on 24 June, 3 days after the summer solstice, and 6 months before the celebration of the birth of Jesus, at the time of the winter solstice, on 25 December. Mark has nothing about the birth of John, but it is curious that he should recount his death, see previous chapter, precisely at the point of the narrative when Gemini crosses into Cancer, and Darlison stresses that, not me. This could be purely fortuitous, of course, but it could well be, as I suspect, that midsummer has been in some way connected with John from the very beginning of Christianity, at least from the time the Gospels were written. If this is so, the implication is that Jesus was always associated with the midwinter solstice too, and that the celebration of his birth on 25 December was part of the Christian mysteries from the earliest days. It was not simply a later concession of paganism, as is generally thought. And now comes one of the more interesting episodes in Jesus' ministry. Beware the leaven of the Pharisees. I'll talk about that in my Introduction to the Bootcamp for Saints series. It's an excellent go-to story. Some of the details are more revealing than you think. Now, the disciples had forgotten to bring any bread, and they had only 1 loaf with them in the boat. And he cautioned them, saying, Watch out, beware of the yeast of the Pharisees and the yeast of Herod. And they said to one another, It is because we have no bread. And becoming aware of it, Jesus said to them, Why are you talking about having no bread? Do you still not perceive or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Do you have eyes and fail to see? Do you have ears and fail to hear? And do you not remember? When I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many baskets full of broken pieces did you collect? They said to him, 12. And the 7 for the 4,000, how many baskets full of broken pieces did you collect? And they said to him, 7. Then he said to them, Do you not yet understand? 5 loaves for 5,000, 12 baskets left. This is the Jewish group. 7 loaves for 4,000, 7 baskets left. This is the second miraculous feeding with the Gentiles. Are these numbers important? Yes. 5 loaves, 5,000 fed, the 5 books of Moses. 12 baskets left over, the 12 tribes of Israel. Now the second set of numbers might have a meaning to you, it might jump out at you. You've been watching the videos that I've produced since December of last year, that's 2018. because I've been watching the videos of Michael Heiser over at Logos Software. He's the big guy in charge of translations. You have 7 loaves, 7 baskets, 4,000 fed. It's a 70 nations that spread out into the 4 corners of the world after a rebellion at the Tower of Babel. Now, Paul of Tarsus often talked about wanting to visit Spain because he thought that that was the farthest western reach of that original diaspora, and he wanted to preach to the descendants of the nation that might have descended there. That's the nation of Tarshish. And so now that will bring an end to our meditation on Cancer for the Gospel of Mark for 2019. Our next one will be over Leo, the Transfiguration. I've talked about that a lot in a lot of my videos. God bless.